All right. Does everyone need a coffee break? And we're going to spice this up a little bit. So, fireside chat sounds a little boring. What about a live podcast? Thanks for having me here today. My name is Danielle Rousseau, and I am the director of 35 Meals Innovation Hub. Weird name. It's not because I'm a workhorse and it's not a craft beer. It's actually Florida Power and Light's Innovation Hub. So we work with startup founders, and we're very excited to support the ecosystem. But really, what's more important to us is supporting partners like 161 Ventures, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about the history of Gatorade. And how many of you know that it was invented here? Show me. Did you know it was actually invented 300 feet from where we are today? So very, very close to where we are.
Give or take.
Well, that's what you told me. Yes, we're starting with that. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not an engineer, so I know a lot of you are. With that, Brad, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of get us into the history of Gatorade?
Sure. Thanks, Danielle.
And there's some great product placement here, so I said I would bring it on stage.
That was not the original version of Gatorade.
And no one's getting dunked after this, I promise. But if you don't ask questions, we'll see.
So I'm Brad Gamble. I am the new CEO of the Cade Museum here in Gainesville. I came to Gainesville in 1997 to go to school, originally from Stewart, so many of you from South Florida have probably driven past some exits on the turnpike there. I started my career, I was a business major in Florida, and I started my career at a company called Infinite Energy, and actually we have a couple of Infinite Energy alum here as well. We were a natural gas and electricity company that sold energy in many states across the U.S. I joined in college. I was a cold caller. So if anybody has...
They don't know what that is.
Okay. So that's when... This is going to be really good. So we had these things called the yellow pages. They were actually yellow pieces of paper. Big books. And we would actually go through there and cold call. We could pick up a phone and dial it. The phone had a cord on it. And we would call businesses throughout the Southeast and try to sell them natural gas. Now, being from South Florida, when I started, I said, what is natural gas? We're all propane, pretty much, in South Florida. So anyway, so I started doing that in college, and then graduated in 1999, was hired to become the inside sales manager, managing this really small call center at the time, which I don't know why the owners of the company had this much faith in me to make it a 22-year-old a manager of other people, but they did, thankfully, and did that for about 5 years, and then in 2006, I became the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Infinite Energy. Did that for the next 10 years. We ended up growing the company to, gosh, $700 or $800 million a year in revenue. In Little Gainesville, there was a company doing $700, $800 million a year. In 2014, I was ready for a change. I've been doing the same thing for 15 years. I'd always been very entrepreneurial, and so I left the company, and because the two founders of Infinite Energy were from Gainesville, I was actually connected into the Gainesville startup scene. So that's when a lot of the startups that were starting to make waves in Gainesville were really bringing a lot of focus here. And but because we didn't have any customers in Gainesville when I was at Infinite Energy, I didn't know anything about the Gainesville business community. So I took about 2 years and just met every founder, every CEO that I could find in Gainesville. Meet with them, talk about revenue strategies, talk about scaling plans, and had an idea to start a company here in Gainesville that did two things. One was to give college students the experience that I had when I was in college of doing lead generation, cold calling, doing entry-level sales, but also helping companies that didn't know how to do that. So I started a company called The Selling Factory in 2016. Selling Factory, we launched actually right across the street from the basketball stadium here at UF. We hired college students. Over a 7-year period, we ended up hiring 1,200 UF students to work for us in in a sales apprenticeship program, working with companies across the globe. Did that for 8 years, or about 7 years. I'll mention this about entrepreneurship. I know we have a lot of very successful and budding entrepreneurs here. It's really friggin' hard. They say the adage of it's a lot different when you're signing the back of a check and signing the front of the check. And actually knowing that you're always looking at what your cash flow is. I mean, you're like, can I just get to 90 days of cash so I could make payroll. Those are some of the challenges that we certainly faced a lot. So, and now at Cade, there was an opportunity to join the Cade Museum, and actually, the reason why I'm sitting in this chair and I have this job actually is because of Justice. Because Justice actually shared a post on LinkedIn that Cade was looking for a new CEO, and they were looking for somebody who could expand Cade's brand throughout the U.S. So I was blessed to get that opportunity and started that in April, and I'm here today.
So for those that don't know the Cade Museum, I know we've got folks from all over here,
Yeah.
a lot of people do. Who is Dr. Cade and how did Gatorade get its start?
So the Cade Museum for Creativity and Invention opened in 2018, and it honors the legacy of Dr. Robert Cade, who was the lead inventor for Gatorade. In 1965, right over in the College of Medicine, that's where Gatorade was born. And it's a fascinating story. I never got the pleasure of meeting Dr. Cade. I know maybe some in the room have. He passed away in, I think, 2007. But in 1965, so Dr. Cade was a nephrologist. So he was in the renal medicine portion of the College of Medicine.
That's a kidney doctor.
Kidney doctor, is kidney doctor.
Just translating here.
And so, the College of Medicine was relatively new at the time, and he was recruited to come here. He was from Texas, and he brought his family. And so he was studying the kidneys and everything had to do with the kidneys. And he was one day in 1965, he had a meeting with Dwayne Douglas. And Dwayne Douglas was a security guard at the University of Florida. He was also an assistant football coach for the Gators, which is kind of funny to think that you're like a part-time
So
assistant.
transferable skills are a real
Yeah,
thing.
security guard, and he actually played for the Gators. He was an All-American lineman back in, I think, like the 40s or 50s or something like that. So he was having coffee with Dr. Cade, and he said, Dr. Cade, you're a kidney specialist. I have a question for you. Why don't my football players pee during practice?
I told you this is going to be interesting and different.
It is. I could say urinate, but pee's a fun one. It's more word. He goes, we've even had players that have been passing out, go into the infirmary in these super hot summers with swampy summers we have here in Gainesville. And so Dr. K was like, that's very interesting. I want to think about that. So he went back to his lab, Dr. K did, and he gathered up his team, and he said he ended up going to head coach Ray Graves for the Florida Gators and said, head coach Graves, I would like to test the players. I'd like to take some samples from the players at your next practice. And Coach Graves said, well, you're not going to touch my varsity team, but you can do whatever you want with the freshman team.
Or freshman.
Doesn't matter. So Dr. Cade goes to practice, and there's 10 freshmen that him and his team are taking sweat samples, they're taking their temperature, they're taking blood samples throughout practice. So they go back to the lab with these results of all these tests, and they find out that they're losing sodium, they're losing fluids, they're losing potassium, they're losing electrolytes. And so they said, okay, well, we have to come up with a solution that will be able to rapidly reintroduce electrolytes into their body. So they put together glucose, they put together sodium, and they came up with this concoction. So they go back to practice and say, I think we've got the solution here. And so he said, okay, well, you can give it to the freshman players. So they're giving it to the freshman players. Immediately, they all start spitting it out and said, this is the most disgusting thing I've ever tasted in my life. There's no way that I could actually drink this. So Dr. Cade and his team are sad about that. They're like, well, what good is it that I could actually ingest this concoction we made? So Dr. Cade's wife, Mary, they had 6 kids, and they lived right off University Avenue. The house is still owned by the Cade family. His wife, Mary, said, well, Bob, why don't you just add lemon to it to make it taste better? So Bob's like, Bob's a scientist. He's like, he's not thinking about taste, he's thinking about the effectiveness of it. So they start adding lemons to it. So they were making all this concoction, added lemons to it. And then there was a scrimmage. It was called the toilet bowl scrimmage. This is between the freshman team and the varsity team. It was like a Thursday night scrimmage. And so So Dr. Cade actually got the freshman team to drink this drink. And they kept it down. It was iced down, so it was somewhat refreshing. Well, what ended up happening was, for the first time in Gator football history, the freshmen beat the varsity team in the scrimmage. So Coach Ray Graves goes to Dr. Cade and says, I want my entire team drinking this drink this solution that you have when we play number 6 LSU next weekend. So Dr. Cade is like, okay, now we gotta make a lot of this stuff. So he goes back to the lab, he's got all of his scientists together there, and the issue they had is they ran out of glucose. So it's not something that you just keep around, I guess, right? So Dr. Cade started actually going around to the other labs in the College of Medicine and taking glucose from all the other labs that were in there and leaving IOU notes saying, I owe you glucose, but I really need it because Coach Ray Graves says we have to make all this stuff. So fast forward, they get to the game, everybody's drinking Gatorade. Actually, it wasn't called Gatorade at the time. Everybody was drinking this solution, and University of Florida stunned LSU with a second half comeback. And they were fully hydrated the second half. And so word started to spread, there were articles being written about it. I mean, it was going nuts. Fast forward a year, Florida played Georgia Tech, who was number 8 at the time in the Orange Bowl. And same thing, comeback win. The Florida Gators were getting to be known as the second half team, and they ended up beating Georgia Tech. Now it's spreading like crazy. Actually, at the end of that game, Coach Bobby Dodd from Georgia Tech was interviewed and said, Coach, what happened? And he told the reporter, we didn't have Gatorade. So that's what front page news, it was all over the place. The NFL team started using it, colleges from all over the country. I'm skipping a few parts here. But there's, it all of a sudden just started to have grew into a worldwide brand.
And now he's coined the phrase kind of inventivity, which is something that the Cade Museum really espoused. So can you go into what that inspires behind inventivity of the Gatorade brand and the Cade Museum?
Yeah, so the Cade Museum, does everybody know where the Cade Museum, does anybody know where the Cade Museum is? Downtown Gainesville, big, beautiful building. Okay, great. So what the inspiration behind the Cade Museum was, yes, to honor the legacy of Dr. Cade. Yes, to showcase the history of the invention of Gatorade and our exhibits there. But really, what's really unique about the museum is that everything that is taught, all the experiences there, are through the lens of invention. So it's not just a science museum. Science museums are great, but actually talking about inventors, talking about the process of inventing. And Cade, about 10 years ago, trademarked the term inventivity. Inventivity is a mashup between creativity and inventiveness. And that's actually being a creative problem solver, being resilient. That's all around the idea of inventivity. So all the curriculums that we have for kids, all the exhibits that we have, all the camps, maker workshops, it's all through the lens of invention, and we promote inventivity for the next generation.
Well, speaking of inventivity, you've had quite a career you're leading as a CEO of a nonprofit, you started your own company, you worked in corporate, you survived working for an energy company. I still work at one, so I haven't survived it yet. But can you go into maybe some of the qualities and what you've learned from the different paths your career has taken, maybe what some of the students can learn from that?
Sure, yeah, so when I was when I had the selling factory, I really got to work with college students a lot. Again, 1,200 of them that we had working for us over 7 years. And what I've noticed, some of the things some of the common things you hear is I need to work at this gigantic company, I need to work at Google, I need to work at Meta, I need to work at Tesla, whatever it might be. And so what we've talked a lot about with our students is that it doesn't really matter which company you work for. If it can be a company that you love. It doesn't matter if it's big, it doesn't matter if it's small. It's taking the skills that you're learning right now, this professional capital that you're building, and being able to apply it to any kind of company. So for every gigantic software company, there's probably 5,000 companies in that same vertical that you could get in early on, that you could take a different approach in terms of the industries that you're in. We really talked a lot about putting yourself out there. And I'm a Gator grad, I bleed orange and blue. My father's a Gator grad. My mom was a secretary in IFAS in 1966. So I love the University of Florida, but it is a bubble. Archer, 34th University, there is a bubble there. There's a whole world outside of Gainesville if you're on campus here. I really encourage students, go talk to business owners. If there's a retail shop, a restaurant, if you're entrepreneurial, go talk to an entrepreneur. Ask them what it's like. What are the things that they're worrying about? What are the things that keep them up at night? Because there's a lot of glitz and glam in the world of entrepreneurship, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that comes along with it. So, and the other thing too is if you're somebody my age, you've been in the business world for a while, or you're a business owner, if a 21-year-old college student comes up to you and says, I'm really interested in entrepreneurship. I'm interested in running a business like this one day. Could you lend me 15, 20 minutes just so I can pick your brain? 100% of the time they're going to say yes, especially if you're a customer. If you actually pay a bill, they certainly will do it. But they want, because they don't get hit up. They're not. It's odd for college students especially to put themselves out there and actually have those types of conversations. So I would certainly encourage that. I've spent 24 years in the private sector. I've spent 6 months in the nonprofit sector. So it's been really interesting to understand, one, just the revenue dynamics of nonprofits. I've realized that in the private sector, if you're bootstrapped, if you're a profitable business, you actually have to sell products and services to generate profit to reinvest back in your business. In the nonprofit sector, you're mission driven. If you lose money, somebody can donate to you and bail you out. And that's been interesting for me to wrap my head around, because I'm thinking we have to sell something to earn a profit to reinvest back in the business. Now, thankfully, Cade Museum, we have unbelievable donors. Our network is fantastic. They've been super supportive of what we're doing. But coming from the for-profit world, that's been something I've had to wrap my head around, is just getting out there, building relationships, and asking them to support what we're doing, to support the next generation.
We talked before we got on stage, and you had kind of a unique way that you think students or young entrepreneurs can actually get into owning a business. Do you mind sharing that with the audience more publicly?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure if you've heard of this concept or this wave that's coming. It's called the silver tsunami.
Yeah.
Have you heard about the silver tsunami? Okay, good. We have young people shaking their heads. Good.
I had never heard of it, for the record.
So, there's multiple stats on this, but I think over the next 10 years, 10 million baby boomers are going to be exiting their businesses, exiting their companies. The question that you had earlier, I thought, oh my gosh, there we go. If I was 21 or 22 and loved entrepreneurship, one path is come up with a solution to a problem, build an MVP, test it out, try to wrap a company around it, try to commercialize it, or go to a business that's been around for 20 years, that has customers, that has a brand, that's profitable. Go to that owner and say, I love your business, I love your industry, I'm very entrepreneurial, I want to learn from you for the next 5 years. And I would love to set up a plan, if we feel comfortable with each other over this 5-year period, to where you can exit the business, maybe you can own or finance it, I will buy it back from you over time, and I can keep your legacy going. And I looked at that going, my gosh, it doesn't always have to be a new company. It could be an existing company that's doing very well, that a new generation entrepreneur can now take into the future with new ideas, new marketing, new technology that maybe this other business owner just hadn't thought of yet. So that's what I would, I think I would, if I was 21, I would be looking hard at that right now.
So, as a startup founder, selling factory, worked with students, what was your greatest moment as a founder and your most difficult, and what did you learn from those?
I would say the greatest moment was signing that first customer and having no idea what we were going to sell them. We had an idea of what we were going to do, but when you're starting out, you're not sure you might not be sure especially if you're in a service business, you're not quite sure what your service is going to be. I knew we had a whole bunch of college students that we were teaching how to get into sales, and we had companies that did not like to do sales. So customer came and said, "Hey, can you do this?" I said, "Absolutely, we can do that. It's funny, but that's our expertise." And they signed a contract, and we quickly taught our team how to do that, and did very well. So, I mean, we had serious ups and downs. I mean, you think about the last 7 years. We dealt with COVID, we went fully remote, we were hybrid, we were fully remote, we were hybrid again. I mean, the challenges that we had, I'd say probably the low point was when probably the fourth or fifth wave of success we were having, I realized that this business was not, even though we were at a high point, this business was not going to last. We had dreams of building this into a $50 million company. We got it to $1 million company, and we knew it wasn't going to go any further than that. So it was sad. That was about a year ago. But overall, I mean, I could write a book on the mistakes, the lessons, what I've learned by running a company.
Well, now you're the CEO of the Cave Museum, and funny story, they did a nationwide search for how many months? 15 months?
Yeah, about a year.
And how far do you live from the Cave Museum where they found you?
8.5 miles.
Yeah, so the opportunity you might be looking for might be in front of you. Timing matters. I have a few more questions for you, but I'm able to open up for the audience for questions.
As a student with the startup, how would you manage the student life and the startup life? Because I'm not in it.
You're not managing really well?
No, students gone.
I'll say one thing. So I have my leadership coach for the 35 Meals program here, and one thing that she's taught me is, and I think someone spoke about it earlier, is you have to align to your values. When you're aligned to your values and you're taking care of yourself, if health and well-being is important to you, then I would say you probably need to get more sleep. Are you getting the results that you have? So making sure that how you're working, whether it's your school life, is aligning with your goals, so that you can actually try to, because it makes your decisions a lot easier. If you're choosing between 3 things, but you know where your values are, it's going to be a lot easier to pick the one thing. If you're choosing all 3, then you're not potentially choosing the right path for yourself. But also keeping guardrails on your health, right? I mean, at some point you can't run a good business if you're not well. So make sure, number one, that you're prioritized. For me, health and well-being is very important. So hearing that, I would say, please take care of yourself as a human being. But when you're choosing between many, many things, aligning to whatever is your value is the easiest way to choose.
I can't top that. That was great.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Machado. I'm a student at UF. I have been leading my nonprofit organization for 8 years now. I'm doing the minor in nonprofit management and also for-profit, like entrepreneurship minor. So I have been doing those connections that you're mentioning, and I'm curious, like, which ones are the main and that advantages that you have been finding about working in the nonprofit sector that are an advantage? Because for us, UF students, I'm not sure if you knew it, but once you graduate, you're probably gonna work in a nonprofit organization. So I don't remember right now, there is a high percentage of gators that are employed after graduation in nonprofit organizations. So what would be like the main advantages that you find, and advice for us if somebody is interested in the nonprofit sector?
That's a great question. What I've noticed is it's way easier to get a meeting with somebody of influence as a nonprofit leader than a for-profit leader. Why is that? Well, as a nonprofit leader, you have some kind of social good that you are trying to embark upon. You want to positively impact others. People want to hear those stories. As a for-profit company, you might just be trying to sell them something. And so that's one thing that I would say that it's definitely much easier to get a meeting. For those, we had a lot of students in my old company that went to the nonprofit space or wanted to launch a nonprofit. The same advice I would give to somebody that wants to go into business is go work for a nonprofit. Go work for a nonprofit, whichever part of the nonprofit you want to work in. I mean, if you can fundraise, you can get a job at any nonprofit there is. But definitely work in a nonprofit, learn the inner workings of what it means, how you balance revenue, expenses, mission-driven work and outreach that you're doing. But I have a newfound respect for those in the nonprofit sector.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad. This is great.
Good to see you again.
So, talk a little bit about Dr. Cade and his family's interest in the arts, because I know music has been. What, is it on there?
You can repeat it.
I think it died. I'll talk louder. I was curious about Dr. Cade's interest in music, especially in the arts, and how that is part of the inventivity formula, because I know they really believe that the arts are one of the engines that fuels creativity.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think we're all, so we're just gonna have to shout.
So,
Maybe drink some Gatorade. I don't know.
so Dr. Cade was actually a concert level violinist. Louder than that.
Yeah.
So Dr. Cade was a violinist. His family played piano. I know Phoebe, his youngest, who is the chair of our board, is an unbelievable piano player. You hear a lot about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. At Cade, it's STEAM. We introduce art into what we're doing because that can fuel the creativity process. And so whether it's, we saw a lot of companies recently with our Cade Prize that we have every year that actually introduce really creative ways, artistic ways to fuel engineering, to fuel technology into the product that they're developing. So art and music has really been at the core of the Cade family for as long as they've been around.
Thank you.
Testing, there we go.
Oh, are we back? We're back.
It's not one thing, it's another.
We've been talking about grit and resilience, so if we can't handle not having microphones, we shouldn't be up here.
Yeah, we gotta do a lot more than that.
Any other public questions?
Question. So, Brad, of all the people you have worked with throughout your career, who is your absolute favorite coworker ever? It's a planted question, but the more serious question is this.
I can answer that if you want to.
You don't have to. That's just me. The question that I have is, both of you and I know cold calling very well. For the people in the audience, can you talk about the importance of learning that skill and how important it is for business and success to be able to do that and do it well?
So when you take a job or you want to get it, cold calling, even in a sales role or even if you're a founder, it's just the idea of reaching out to somebody, interrupting their day, trying to give them information and then not hang up on you. That's really what cold calling is. And so it's really hard to do that the first time. It's hard the 50th time. The 100th time, it's not nearly as hard. And really the hardest part is just getting started and making the decision that you actually want to cold call. Now, cold calling is a lot different now than it was 20, 25 years ago. I mean, there's AI companies that are building agents who could be doing cold calling if they aren't doing them already. So I feel like that's cheating a little bit. I still think that building that resilience muscle is so important. There's other ways you can do that though. So maybe you're not cold calling. Maybe you're going into, there's a great book called $1 Million Weekend by Noah Kagan that I highly recommend. He talks about this concept where ask for discounts wherever you go. Ask for a discount. If you go to get a cup of coffee, ask for 10% off. If you go to dinner, ask for $10 off.
So are you giving 10% off at the Cade? I'm just kidding. I didn't a cold call. Just kidding. I got rejected.
No, but I want people to ask. No, it's super awkward. You want to put yourself in a situation, you're like, oh, it's icky, I'm going to annoy somebody. Well, most of the time they're going to say, no, I'm not going to give you, at Opus Coffee, I've tried, they're not going to give you 10% off. And that's okay, but you've now learned to be rejected. And by building that kind of that rejection muscle over time, it's going to serve you so much better as you get into business.
And I think one of my other friends in the audience said, it's really redirection, right? It's not failure, it's redirection. So how do you take resilience, and life is going to give you a lot of redirections, and some of you are finding that already in your life, and if you haven't, you certainly will many, many times, but how do you handle the redirections? And I think cold calling might be the fastest way to get that.
Yeah, really any kind of customer service job, or gosh, door-to-door sales, if anybody's ever done door-to-door sales, mad respect. Anytime you put yourself out there in situations that are uncomfortable like that, it's going to do nothing but make you stronger.
And the importance of a network. So I know a lot of you have been sitting here all day and being great listeners, but there's a lot of great people here. I think there's a networking break coming up. Make sure you go up to people, ask what they do. Don't be shy. People want to talk. Generally, ask them questions about themselves, and really build your own network and start as early as possible. Any other questions?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for doing what you're doing, speaking and bringing yourself forward here. But the cold calling thing, we instituted something a long time ago, and we changed it from cold calling to opening conversations. And the mental change when one comes in that way shows immediately as a return.
That's a great way to frame it.
Right. All right, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, everybody.